Hello, my name is Jill Matoliak, and I'm the International Admissions Coordinator at HACC Central Pennsylvania's Community College. Welcome and thank you for attending our webinar on essay writing tips. We are coming to you from Pennsylvania, which is in the northeast part of the United States, and we are located in central Pennsylvania. We are in close distance, travel distance to New York City, Baltimore, Maryland, Washington, D.C., some very popular travel options for students, just to give you a general idea of our location. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Emily Fox, and she's going to introduce herself and then also introduce our special guest, our presenter for today's topic.
Thank you, Jill, and welcome. Thank you for attending. My name is Emily Fox. I'm the Virtual Learning Admission Counselor at HACC Central Pennsylvania's Community College, and I have the pleasure of introducing our main presenter today, who I like to refer to as our expert of writing, Hetal Thaker. She's an assistant professor of English at HACC Central Pennsylvania's Community College, Lancaster campus in Pennsylvania. And before teaching at HACC, she taught at other schools in Pennsylvania and New York. So she teaches all levels of college writing from developmental to advanced composition, along with other literature courses. So you're in for a real treat today hearing from Hetal. Hetal, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today what I will be sharing with you is just a relatively brief introduction to essay writing. This is in no means a replacement for an entire class, but I would like to give you a little inside tip into what college writing is like. And in order to do that, we'll be talking about what exactly is a college essay, why do we write it, and what is it made up of? So, what are the parts of an essay? And then, how do we go about writing it? And we call that the writing process. So, just a brief introduction into essay writing that hopefully should help you down the road when you start college, but probably also right now if you're in school. It can be of use to you as well. Okay, so the college essay. Why do we write essays? Typically, when you are in college, when you are in high school, regardless of where you are, you think of your literature class, you think of classes where you have to write about yourself, write personal narrative essays. And that is certainly the case, that's one of the purposes, but more and more, especially in the United States, students are finding that they are writing essays in all sorts of classes. So you might be in a math class and be asked to write a paper. You could be writing a lab report in a biology class. Writing really, um, you can find writing in pretty much any discipline at this point. So we talk about different purposes of writing for that reason because there are a lot of different writing situations. And we like to generally narrow it down to three different purposes. So one is that personal or narrative essay, where you are writing about yourself, you're telling a story about yourself, you're helping your readers understand your experience better. But that's not the only kind of writing. And probably more often in college, you will find that you're writing informative essays, which are providing information to your readers. So, for instance, you could be in a biology class and be asked to describe the human heart and the functions of the human heart. And your goal there is really to educate your readers and provide them with the information. Um, a lot of writing in college is persuasive. So, in a persuasive essay, what you're trying to do is prove a point, right? You're stating a claim that is based on your personal opinion, and you're going to try to convince your readers to agree with you. So, when we're talking about writing, we talk about the purpose, and we talk about the audience. Those are the people that are reading your essay. So you're going to hear me say purpose and audience a few times, and that is what I'm referring to. The format really depends on the course and the professor. So as I mentioned before, writing a personal essay about yourself in an English class or in a writing class or in a class like that is going to be very different from writing a lab report in a chemistry class or writing a proposal in a business class. So the format really varies by the course, so by the subject, and by that I mean the purpose as well, and by the professor. So I always tell my students, I teach composition classes, which pretty much every major has to take. And the idea of a composition class is it's preparing students to write essays in other classes. So they typically take my classes when they first get to HACC, and that's true at pretty much every college. And I tell them that ultimately, if you're in a class and a professor tells you to do something and it's different from what a different professor told you to do, it doesn't matter. You kind of just do what that professor tells you to do so you can get a good grade. So format varies, and I just wanted to make a point about grading. So how do we typically grade the essay? Because I know a lot of students have anxiety about that. So I know I speak for most professors when I say that most important is originality and the development of your idea. So really, the goal of an essay is to share your ideas with your audience, right? So helping your audience learn about what you're thinking about, what you're interested in. So having that unique idea, starting with a really interesting and unique idea, and being able to present that clearly is really weighted much more heavily than something like grammar or sentence structure. And I think a lot of students are surprised by that. But when you're in college, really, you're there to develop your ideas, you're there to strengthen your ideas, learn new things. And the idea of the essay is to share that. So originality is super important. I don't want to minimize the importance of grammar and sentence structure and mechanics. Those are important too, because if your essay is really grammatically challenged, then your readers are going to have a hard time understanding your ideas. And you can't be successful if your readers are confused. So just a little general background on what an essay is and the purpose of it. Okay, so now we know what an essay is, what's the purpose of it, what is it made of. That's the parts of an essay. Now, this is a very simplified formula that I'm going to share with you, and it's a great starting place if you're not familiar with writing or you have not had a lot of experience writing essays. It's perfectly straightforward, and it can be a really good starting off place. Ideally, the more that you write, the more that you can sort of push the boundaries of these elements that I'm going to introduce you to. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the parts of an essay include an introduction where you're presenting your topic to your readers, and then your supporting paragraphs, and those are really there to develop your idea that you introduced in your first few paragraphs. And your support paragraphs, you could have 3, you could have 2, you could have 3 pages worth. It really depends on the length of your assignment. And then your conclusion. So we try not to stop there. We like to conclude our essays to finish our thoughts. Other things that I'll be mentioning a little while later, organization is really important. So we think about not just what we're saying, but also how we're saying it. What order are we presenting our ideas in? And then this use of a writing process. So we like to joke that the writing process does not mean you start writing your essay the night before it's due. It is a time-consuming process, and that's what makes writing fun and also really a useful tool for expressing your ideas. And in a lot of situations in college writing, you are using outside sources to support your ideas. And so if you're using articles from the website or from a book, we have you cite them so your readers know what ideas are yours and what are ideas you're getting from somebody else. So I'm going to break all of these elements down for you. Let's start with the introduction. The introduction, if we're going by that very basic model that I mentioned, and it's a short essay of maybe 2-3 pages, the first 1 to 2 paragraphs of your essay. So that's a pretty significant portion of your essay. And really the goal of it is to draw your reader in. So think about the last time you read a book and that really just drew you in from the first sentence. That's what we're going for in our essays too, because if we draw the reader in, they're much more likely to stick around, read what we have to say, and believe us. And ultimately, college writing is preparing you for professional writing. And if you're writing a business plan, if you're writing a lab report, if you're trying to, write a grant application in the real world, you want to draw your readers in because you want something from your readers and they need to be engaged in order to listen to you. So, very general ways that you can do that is with some kind of bold statement or a surprising fact or statistic, even a quote or a question. So, quite a few ways that you can draw your reader in. You could tell a little story even in the beginning. Magazine articles like to do that a lot. They'll start with a story of an individual person, and that's a great way to draw your reader in. Then you have some other options. You can provide some general background on the topic. So if you're talking about, for instance, a local issue in your paper, maybe you can start by discussing it on a national level and kind of narrow it down. So the way I like to present it is in your introduction, you're sort of taking a general topic and you're moving it into the more specific range. And ideally, the goal of your introduction is what your essay is really about. So it's your main idea, the central claim that you're trying to make in the essay. And we make a big deal about thesis statements in college writing classes. And the reason that we do is because it really forces you as the student to be able to articulate the point of your essay in 1 to 2 sentences. So it's great to have a thesis and an essay, but even more important is that act of coming up with the thesis statement for you as the writer, because it really makes you refine your thoughts and get them across as clearly as possible. So in some ways, that thesis statement is like the most important sentence in your whole paper, because it really makes you think about your topic. And if you do include that in your essay, it makes your readers really know what's coming, and that's what readers like. So I gave you a sample thesis, and this is a really simple thesis statement. For the safe driver, there's no harm in using a cell phone on the road. So a couple reasons why this is a good entry level, but still a good thesis statement. First of all, it's really clear, right? We know what this writer's opinion is on using cell phones on the road, and we know that that is presented clearly. So now, based on this thesis statement, I know what the student's paper is going to be about. So it's a good thesis statement because it's going to direct the reader to exactly what the paper is about. Another point about this is if this student were writing a paper that said for the safe driver, you should never use a cell phone, that would be a weaker thesis statement because that's pretty much common knowledge, right? We know that it's most safe to not be distracted while you're driving. So unlike the current thesis statement that I have here, you really have to be careful that you don't pick a thesis statement that's obvious or that already, especially for this, which is a persuasive thesis statement, that everybody already agrees with, right? You want to stick with something that is provocative, that is interesting, because again, that's what we like to share in our essays, is our interesting ideas and our unique ideas. All right, so once I've presented my central claim, which is the thesis, the goal really of the rest of my paper is to develop and support that thesis statement. So now, in however many paragraphs I have, what I need to make sure I'm doing is providing all the information I need to achieve my purpose. So, for instance, if I'm looking, let me just go back for a second, at the thesis statement down here, what you'll find is that it's pretty simple, right? It's a pretty simple thesis statement. So for this particular thesis, I'm guessing the assignment would be to write 2, maybe 3 pages. If your essay was longer, if you were assigned a 5-page essay or a 10-page essay, your thesis could be broader. But because, let's say, this thesis is so specific, it's probably a shorter paper. All right, so what that means is I'm going to have fewer support paragraphs. So maybe for an essay with that thesis statement, I have 3 body paragraphs. And each of those body paragraphs, just like that introduction, has a very specific formula that we use, right, where we kind of grab the reader's attention, give background on the topic, provide the thesis statement. A supporting paragraph also follows a really basic format. And what that format is you begin with a topic sentence, which is like a mini thesis statement, that directly relates to that thesis. So the point of a topic sentence in a body paragraph, it's the first sentence of the paragraph. So it tells your reader what that paragraph is going to be about. But it also needs to connect to the thesis statement. So your reader needs to see how this paragraph is going to develop and support the thesis. And then the other sentences in that paragraph provide evidence to support the topic sentence. And what that means is that's where you put your factual information, your statistics, your quotes, whatever you need to develop your topic sentence. And it could just be logic, right? Where you present the reasoning for what you're saying. So the supporting paragraphs is where we put all of our information that really builds our argument, builds our thesis statement. And then you can't just stop there because you need a conclusion. So typically a conclusion, just like your introduction, is 1 to 2 paragraphs, but there's some flexibility here. A lot of students struggle with conclusion paragraphs, and I can understand that because it can be a little challenging. You feel like you've said everything that you wanted to say, but now I have to write this conclusion. So here are some options. The one that is most widely taught, especially in middle schools and high schools here, is that to summarize the main points of the essay, but briefly and in a new way. I typically tell my students that you can really only do that if you have a long essay. So if you have a 2-page essay, then by the time you get to your conclusion, your readers haven't really forgotten anything that you said in your essay, right? So summarizing the main points is a little silly. But if you have a 10-page essay, then it's really likely that your readers might have forgotten some things they read on page 2. So reminding them of the importance of it on page 10 makes complete sense. So really that depends on your writing situation. Other things you can do, you can end with a quote or a question or another story, just like you did in the introduction. So you have all of those options for you. What's very good to do, what's a very nice way to conclude your essays, and it really depends on what your topic is, but is to outline the next steps for your topic. So let's say you are writing about a problem, right? Maybe it's a problem that you think needs to be fixed, whether it's at the local level, the national level, the international level, whatever it is, some kind of problem. In your conclusion, you could provide the solution. So typically when we present a problem in our essays, we need to have an idea for a solution, and you could put that in your conclusion. Another thing you can do is maybe you can't come to any conclusions, right? So maybe based on your research, based on the time you spent on this topic, it's hard to come to a consensus. And I think a good recent example of that is there's a lot of debate about the safety of cell phones. So are cell phones safe for us to be using constantly? And really, they're just too new to come to any kind of consensus about it. So scientists don't agree. And so we can't really come to any conclusions if the scientists haven't come to any conclusions. So instead, what we can do is outline, next steps. So what else do we need to be looking at in the future, right? And by we, I mean just the general, right, public, before we can come to a really clear conclusion about this topic. The final thing you could do is something that's called a call to action. This is another kind of form of those next steps. And a call to action is really meant if you want your readers to do something after they finish reading your essay. So, for instance, Peter Singer, who is a very well-known Australian, I believe, philosopher, he's very well known for ending his essays or including somewhere in his essays a call to action. And he often writes about ethics. And one of the things that he'll do is if he's writing a paper about how we need to give more to charity, how the typical person needs to give more to charity, he'll say, stop reading right here and call this number and donate some money. And I mean, that's a pretty direct call to action, right? If you're directing your readers to stop reading and go do something else right now. And it's really effective because it's so direct. And so it's okay to be that direct. So you have a lot of options. I know the typical student is not going to do that, but that's where you can show a little bit of creativity. Okay, so this is a little hard to see, but I don't really need you to see what's written here in the sample essay. I just want you to see the format more than anything. So this is a very short essay, right? So this is less than 2 pages, and it's the 5 paragraphs. So we have our introductory 1 paragraph, we have 3 body paragraphs, and then we have a conclusion. And the green, what's highlighted in green, is the thesis statement. And then each of the body paragraphs start with a topic sentence, and that's in gray. And they're supported with supporting details, which are in blue. And then the conclusion starts in red. So you can kind of see how these elements work together. In the green thesis statement, we get our main idea. And then each of those gray sentences directly relates to that thesis statement. So directly builds on that idea. And that's kind of how this all works. So everything is really there to support the thesis statement, that sentence in green. And it is typically where I have it here, which is at the end of the first paragraph or at the end of the conclusion. So if your conclusion is 2 paragraphs, it could be in that second paragraph. But if it's 1 paragraph, it's almost always at the end. So just a little sample essay, and I'm going to tell you later on where you can see kind of a more close-up version of this. Okay, so now we know what an essay is made up of. And so I just want to spend a few minutes talking about how to go about writing an essay. I think one of the things that is most important about college writing classes is sharing that writing is not an immediate activity. It's something that takes time. It's something that is a process, right? It is a series of steps that we go through. And it takes trial and error. So if you don't have experience writing a lot of essays, then it's okay if you're not so good at it in the beginning, right? It's about it's a skill just like anything else. So a skill can be learned and it can be developed over time. And that's an important thing to remember. But a lot of people, especially people who aren't big fans of writing, right, typically like to just do it quick and get it over with. And what you'll find, and this is true for pretty much everybody, is that the more time you spend on your writing, the better it is. I think it's pretty straightforward, right? So we like to talk about finding a personal writing process. And what that means is what works for you. What's the best way for you to write an essay? And just to give you an example, for one, I like to do all of my writing, all of my brainstorming beforehand, everything on the computer. So everything is on the computer. I like typing. My ideas come out more clearly when I'm typing, and that's what I prefer. However, a lot of students like doing this by hand first, right? So some students will write their entire essays out by hand first because that's the way that works for them. That's their personal writing process before they will type it up. That's like the last thing they do. So that's one thing to keep in mind. What works for you? Uh, General writing process basics. So it's really important that you find your personal writing process, but we like to think of it just like there are three parts of an essay, there are three parts of the writing process. So step one would be invention. And by invention, we mean coming up with your ideas. So before you even start writing, you have to think of a topic, you have to narrow it down, and you have to make sure that's appropriate for your assignment. And so we like to think of the invention process. This is also called pre-writing, so it's before you start writing, as going from general to specific. So you're taking a broad topic, like cell phones, for instance, and you are really narrowing it down to one specific point that is appropriate both for your audience, who you're writing to, and your purpose. So, what are you writing for? A good example of that is, let's say you're writing about a book that you just read. And in order to know what you can say about the book, you need to know who your audience is. So, is your audience people who've already read the book? If it's people who already read the book, then you can talk about characters as if your audience already knows about those characters, right? Think about a TV show. If you're talking to somebody who also watches the same TV show as you can talk about the characters and the plot, um, and you know that the person you're talking to will understand. If you're talking to somebody who's never seen the show before or never read the book before, you'll have to explain what it's about, who the characters are, give them background, right? So there's a lot of thinking that you need to do before you start writing, and that's what that is. And then we want to develop our main idea. So now that I know the topic, cell phones, for instance, and I know who my audience is, now I want to really refine that topic. And I can do that in a lot of different ways. I'm just mentioning these invention strategies here, and there's a lot of great resources on the internet. So if you want more information on free writing, on brainstorming, listing, outlining, there's so much available for free online. But just very quick, free writing is when you just sit down and you start writing. And it doesn't really matter what comes to your mind, it's all about getting your ideas down. A lot of people think you have an idea and then you write it down. But research has shown that the more that you write, the more that you think. So writing actually generates thought. And that's why things like journaling, keeping a diary are so beneficial because the more that you'll write, the more ideas you'll actually come up with. Also, you can brainstorm. Brainstorming is just so who, what, where, why, when, right? So if you're talking about cell phones, who should I focus on? What do I want to say? Where is it relevant? Why would people care? These are the types of questions I could ask to help me really kind of question, test out my idea, make sure it's a solid, unique idea to share with my readers. The last two, listing and outlining, are really meant to be for later on. So once you've developed your ideas, now how am I going to organize them? So listing and outlining are really about organizing your ideas. And even that you want to do before you start writing. So hopefully by the end of step one, you have all of your ideas and you know what order you're going to present them in. So now with step two, you're actually writing out your draft. And we talk about a first draft because it's not your only draft. You want to, at this point, write out your full essay. Don't stop to correct grammar. Don't stop to correct your sentence structure or verb errors. Just write it all out. Get it all out. So this is the most straightforward step because that's all you're doing. You're writing out your essay, the full essay, and typically this is where we would stop and have them bring in their drafts and do a little workshop. And during the workshop, they are doing step three, and that is the editing and proofreading. This is my favorite step because this is where I already have all my ideas down and now I can tweak them and I can make them better, and I really like that. So for step three, what we want to do first, and there's a lot of different terms for this: revision, editing, proofreading, but they all pretty much mean the same thing. You want to do the editing first, and editing comes before. You can see in this picture there's words crossed out. This comes before all that, before you get to those little word level things. First, you need to look at your content. So do you need to add something to make your point better? Do you end up having a paragraph in there that doesn't really relate to the rest of the essay that you need to take out, right? We have you do this kind of thing first because let's say you check for spelling errors and you spend an hour in a paragraph looking at spelling errors. But then you're going back and you're reading it and you realize, wait a minute, this paragraph doesn't really have anything to do with my essay. And then you have to take it out. Well, now you've wasted an entire hour on checking spelling errors for a paragraph that you took out. So look at your content first. Look at the organization of ideas. Does it make sense, the flow of ideas? How you connect your paragraphs? Is it easy to follow? And after you've done that, then you can go into the proofreading. So then you reread your essay again. You can check for grammar and sentence structure and verb form and tense and all of those things. And you kind of have to do those one at a time. So this can be a time-consuming process. A good tip is to read your essay out loud, either to yourself or to a friend or family member. And even have that friend or family member or a teacher read the essay for you. Because when we're reading our own writing, we are able to fill in gaps with our brains that we don't even know are there. But a new reader will be able to catch those missed words or confusing statements that we don't see because we've just written this essay. It's just too fresh in our minds. So a big part of finishing your essay is rereading it, looking for mistakes, getting feedback from somebody else, and even reread it again, right? You can't read that essay enough times. Okay, so just a couple final tips. I really stressed, and I mentioned it a few times here, to know why you are writing and who you're writing to, audience and purpose. Super important. Another thing is to take your time. So you can't really leave writing to the last minute. And it's easy to do that, right? If you have other classes and other things going on. So don't try to do everything at one time. Spread it out over the course of a couple days or, a week or two if you have that amount of time, and work on it a little bit every day. And ultimately, the goal of writing is to express yourself. And it's easier to do that if you're having fun, if you're talking about a topic that's interesting to you. And you don't always get to do that, right? So you don't always get to write about topics that are interesting to you. But if it's something that isn't, try to find some angle that does interest you. So if you're not really interested in the topic, there's always a way to narrow it down, focus on an element of it that relates to your interest. So try to find that, and if possible, have fun, because that's a great way to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Hetal. I'm not sure if anybody else wanted to mention anything. I'm not sure if on your screen your contact information is listed. Hopefully, you're okay with that. I do have a link here that students can visit for the iTunes U courses and collections to find out more. And then, if you do have any questions for Hetal, do feel free to reach out, or I know Jill and myself are happy to help as well. The way to find out more about HACC is to visit our webpage at hacc.edu, and you can find out Jill and my contact information on there. So thanks for attending. If anybody else has anything to add, go for it.
Yeah, just one last thing. This is Hetal again. I apologize. I did forget to mention that. Yes, please feel free to email me. Um, and I do have an iTunes U class that kind of goes into these elements a little bit more deeply. It's called the Writing Basics Boot Camp. It's a free iTunes U class, and you can see a more close-up version of that sample essay. There are sample assignments on there, and sort of more detailed discussions of uh, revision, of the writing process, of thesis writing, including some exercises. So go ahead and check that out, and feel free to email me if you have questions. Thanks.